My boyfriend introduced me as just someone from work for 3 years, and when I finally confronted him, he admitted his family had already chosen a bride, and I was never meant to be part of the picture. I didn't cry. I simply walked away. That was 10 months ago, and yesterday his wedding was canceled while his mother locked herself away in shame. Have you ever poured your entire heart into a relationship, only to discover you were nothing more than a temporary placeholder? Because for 3 years, that was my life with James. And then, his ex-girlfriend waltzed back in, shattering the fragile peace I'd built and exposing a betrayal so deep it felt like a knife to the chest. See, in Korean families, how you're introduced means everything. If you're a girlfriend, you're a future wife. If you're a friend, you're temporary. And after 3 years with James, I knew exactly which category I belonged to. James had this backstory that made you understand why his parents' approval consumed him. His mom had scrubbed restaurant floors for 16-hour days. His dad delivered newspapers at dawn. They saved every single penny to escape poverty and build an empire, just so their kids could have choices they never did. These two people had given him everything, so yeah, I understood why James couldn't disappoint them. When he introduced me as friend for the 47th time, I just reminded myself that love meant being patient with someone else's fears, even when those fears actively hurt you. But patience has limits. And mine shattered the night Mina walked through his parents' door. She'd flown in from Seoul for his sister's wedding, and James's mother's face. It transformed into something I'd never seen in 3 years of trying to impress her. "Everyone, you remember Mina, the one who got away?" she announced, pulling Mina into the seat right beside James, the seat where I usually sat before I learned my place. I ended up at the table's edge, stuck with his teenage cousins, watching as his mother kept touching Mina's arm, asking about her life, her parents, everything. Every single time I tried to join the conversation, someone would just talk right over me. I mentioned my recent promotion, and his aunt suddenly needed to discuss tomorrow's rain. "James always said you were the perfect girlfriend," his mother told Mina, using the exact words she'd never used for me. James laughed that nervous laugh I knew too well, and he actually looked over at me. That's when Mina finally noticed me. She tilted her head, a sweet, innocent look on her face, and asked, "So, who's your friend?" James hesitated. Just long. Enough for everyone at the table to notice. "Oh," he mumbled, "just someone from work. Just someone from work." Those words burned. They seared through the silent car ride home. James shifted uncomfortably, immediately launching into defenses about his parents being from a different generation. When I didn't respond, he snapped, "You're making this bigger than it is." Everything I'd been holding back, everything I'd swallowed for 3 years, just wore out. I had been his friend at 47 family events, while his actual boss called me his girlfriend. His coworkers saved me seats at company events, and our American friends were literally betting on our wedding date. But the second we crossed his parents' threshold, I vanished completely. I was real everywhere else. Everywhere except where I desperately needed to matter. Just then, in the nick of time, his phone buzzed. It was Mina's name on the screen. He read it, then actually looked at me and asked, "My parents invited her to extend her stay. Would it be weird if she stayed with them?" We'd been together for 3 years, and he was asking my permission to house his ex. My promotion party arrived 2 weeks later, and by then, I'd already decided exactly how this night was going to go. James showed up late, finding me by the bar with my CEO, who immediately smiled at him with recognition. "This must be the boyfriend Sarah's always talking about," she said warmly. I felt James relax beside me, his hand moving toward my back in that familiar, possessive way. But I stepped slightly forward and delivered the words I'd practiced in my mirror for days. "Actually," I said, my voice sweet but firm, "this is James, just some guy I know from around." His face went through the same confusion, the same dawning realization that I'd felt 100 times. My coworker, Lisa, walked over, looking puzzled, clearly about to ask about our living situation. But I was already turning away. I touched Marcus's arm the way James's mother had touched Mina's, introducing him with a warmth James had never given me. When James tried to pull me aside, I pretended not to notice. I let him stand there, shrinking into himself, while everyone wondered who he was to me. Finally, he understood what being erased felt like. We barely made it to my apartment before he confronted me. He loosened his tie, that same nervous energy from dinner now crackling around him, asking why I'd introduced him that way. But this wasn't confusion anymore. His voice had an edge I'd never heard, sharp and mean. "You humiliated me on purpose!" I set my purse down slowly and watched 3 years of patience fall apart between us. My hand stayed steady, but my voice shook when I told him about 47 family dinners where I didn't exist. He walked back and forth in my living room, each step making the situation feel harder than the last. His face got ugly when I mentioned how his mother called Mina girlfriend, but never used that word for me. That's when he turned truly cruel. He brought up Mina's name like she was everything I could never be. She would never pull desperate stunts because she understood respect and family. The way he said her name made me feel sick, because I suddenly knew. She's staying, isn't she? My voice sounded empty and strange to my own ears. He stopped walking and let the silence stretch before finally admitting his parents had offered her a job at their restaurant. They wanted family they could trust. When I asked if I wasn't family after 3 years, he finally looked at me. The anger was gone from his face. Something worse had replaced it. He told me his parents had been introducing him to Korean girls for months, behind my back. This had started before Mina even showed up. My legs felt weak when I mentioned finding his engagement ring searches. He looked away, and his voice got quiet. My mother picked it out for whoever I eventually choose. The wedding's in 6 months. The venue's booked. The dates circled on their calendar. Everything's decided, except the bride. I stood there staring at him, my mind trying to process what he'd just revealed. A wedding planned without a bride. 6 months. Everything arranged except the most important part. My hands gripped the edge of my kitchen counter as I watched him fidget with his phone. The apartment we'd shared groceries in, cooked meals in, built memories in, suddenly felt foreign. He kept glancing at his screen like salvation might arrive, through a text message. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the small box I'd hidden in my dresser drawer. The one with ticket stubs from our first movie, photos from that weekend in Portland, the silly keychain he'd won for me at the States. Fair. 3 years of evidence that we were real, that we mattered. I brought it back to the living room and set it on the coffee table between us. He looked at the box like it might explode. His shoulders tensed, and he took a step backward, bumping, into my bookshelf. The psychology textbooks I'd been studying for my promotion wobbled but didn't fall. I opened the box slowly, pulling out each item and placing them in a line across the table. The movie ticket from our first date. The photo of us at his cousin's graduation where he'd introduced me as his girlfriend to everyone except his parents. The birthday card where he'd written about our future together. His face changed with each item I laid out. The anger dissolved into something that looked almost like panic. He reached for the photo from Portland but pulled his hand back before touching it. Then I found it. The receipt from the engagement ring website he'd accidentally left up on our shared laptop 6 months ago. Not the one his mother picked out. The one he'd been looking at when he thought I was asleep. A simple band with a small stone. Nothing like the elaborate designs his mother favored. He grabbed the receipt and crumpled it in his fist. His breathing got shallow and quick the way it did when his anxiety kicked in. I recognized all his tells after 3 years, the way his left eye twitched slightly. How he pressed his thumb into his palm when stressed. I pulled out my phone and showed him the text his sister had sent me last month, the one where she called me her future sister-in-law and asked if I wanted to go dress shopping for the wedding. His wedding, apparently, just not to me. He sank onto my couch, still clutching the crumpled receipt. His perfectly pressed shirt from the promotion party looked wrinkled now, like he'd aged years in the past hour. I sat in the chair across from him, maintaining the distance he created between us. The silence stretched until he finally started talking. He told me about Sunday dinners where his mother would slide photos of Korean girls across the table, how his father would mention successful daughters of family friends, the way they'd compare every woman to Mina, their gold standard of what a daughter-in-law should be. I listened without interrupting, even when he described how they'd already picked out the flowers for his wedding, white roses and baby's breath, his mother's favorite. How they'd put down deposits I didn't know about, made promises to family in Korea about a traditional ceremony. He talked about the pressure that built every week, every phone call, every visit home. How his mother would cry about wanting grandchildren who looked like her. How his father would remind him of everything they'd sacrificed, everything they'd built for him to throw away on someone who didn't understand their culture. My phone buzzed with texts from Lisa and Marcus, probably wondering where I disappeared to at my own party. I turned it face down and kept listening to James unravel 3 years of hidden truths. He told me about the blind dates they'd arranged that he'd lied about, business dinners that were actually meetings with potential brides, how Mina wasn't the first ex they'd brought back to tempt him. She was just the first one who'd agreed to stay. The crumpled receipt fell from his hand onto my carpet. He stared at it like it held answers he couldn't find. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for him, all the moments I'd swallowed my hurt because I understood the weight of family expectations. But understanding and accepting were different things. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my coworkers were still celebrating my promotion. 3 years of being downgraded from girlfriend to ghost. And James asks if his ex can crash with his parents? That's like asking someone you just stabbed if they mind holding the knife for you. A promotion I'd earned while being invisible to the people who mattered most to him. He stood up, too, moving toward me but stopping halfway across the room. The space between us felt like an ocean. He started to speak, but his phone rang. His mother's ringtone filled the apartment. He looked at the screen, then at me, torn between two worlds he'd never learned to bridge. I turned back to the window, while he let it go to voicemail. We both knew she'd call again. She always did. In the reflection, I watched him pick up the photo from Portland, the one where we looked happy and free and unburdened by other people's dreams. His phone rang again. This time, he answered, his voice shifting into Korean as he stepped into my bathroom for privacy. I heard his muffled responses through the door, the same apologetic tone he always used with them. While he talked, I gathered the items from the coffee table and put them back in the box. Each piece felt heavier than before, weighted with meanings that had shifted in the space of one conversation. I left the box on the table and walked to my bedroom. In my closet, I found the dress his mother had given me last Christmas. The one she'd bought 3 sizes too large because she assumed American women were all big. I'd never worn it, but I'd kept it like evidence of trying. I laid it on my bed and stared at the ugly floral pattern she'd chosen. James emerged from the bathroom looking defeated. His mother had summoned him home. Mina was cooking dinner, and the family wanted him there. He stood in my bedroom doorway like he was waiting for permission to leave or stay. I picked up the dress and handed it to him. He took it with confusion until I explained it was his mother's gift, the one that never fit. His face crumpled as he understood the metaphor I wasn't spelling out. He folded the dress carefully, mechanically, like he was buying time. His phone buzzed with another text. Without looking, we both knew who it was from. The pull of his other life, the one where I didn't exist, grew stronger with each message. I walked past him to the living room and opened my apartment door. The hallway stretched empty and quiet, offering an exit he seemed unable to take. He followed me, still carrying the dress, still looking for words that might fix 3 years of choices. Instead of speaking, he set the dress on my entrance table and pulled out his wallet. From behind his credit cards, he extracted a small photo I'd never seen before. It was us at his company picnic last summer, laughing at something I couldn't remember. Someone had caught us in a moment of pure joy. He placed the photo next to the dress and met my eyes. For the first time all night, he looked like the man I'd fallen in love with, not the stranger he became around his family. But that was the problem. I needed someone who could be himself everywhere, not just in stolen moments. His phone rang again. This time he didn't answer, but we both knew he would leave anyway. He always did. As he stepped into the hallway, he turned back one last time. The question in his eyes was one I couldn't answer for him. I closed the door quietly and leaned against it, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. In my kitchen, I found the wine we'd been saving for a special occasion and poured myself a glass. My promotion felt like a lifetime ago, but it was still worth celebrating, even alone. My phone lit up with messages from my party, but I wasn't ready to explain why I'd vanished with the guy I'd introduced as nobody special. Instead, I sat on my couch with a box of memories and my wine, surrounded by the ghost of a relationship that had existed everywhere except where it mattered most. The dress stayed on my entrance table like a monument to trying to fit into spaces that were never shaped for me. Tomorrow I would donate it along with the other pieces of a life I'd been building in shadows. Tonight I just needed to sit with the weight of finally being seen, even if it meant being seen walking away. James would go home to Mina's cooking and his mother's approval. He'd sit at their table in the seat reserved for the good son, the one who understood duty and tradition and the weight of sacrifice. And maybe he'd think about the photo he'd left behind, the one that proved we were happy once in the spaces between other people's expectations. I finished the wine alone, letting its warmth spread through my chest, while the city lights blurred through tears I hadn't realized were falling. The apartment felt too quiet without James's nervous energy filling the space. I picked up the photo he'd left behind and traced our smiling faces with my finger before placing it back in the box with everything else. My phone vibrated again. Lisa had sent 12 messages asking where I'd gone and if everything was okay. Marcus had added 3 more, offering to come check on me. I typed back that I'd explain tomorrow, then turned off my phone completely. The last thing I needed was to field questions about the man I'd just erased from my professional life, the way he'd erased me from his personal one. I spent the rest of the night packing away traces of James from my apartment. His coffee mug went into a box. The spare toothbrush he kept in my bathroom joined it, his favorite blanket that he'd left draped over my couch. Each item represented another piece of a life we'd built in private, away from his family's judgment. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by memories of better times. I woke at dawn with my neck stiff from falling asleep on the couch, still wearing my dress from the promotion party. The apartment looked different in the morning light, emptier, but somehow cleaner too. I showered and dressed for work mechanically, trying not to think about how James would be waking up at his parents' house right now, probably to the smell of Mina's cooking and his mother's approving smile. The thought made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to eat breakfast anyway. The office buzzed with post-party energy when I arrived. Lisa cornered me immediately at my desk, her eyes wide with concern and curiosity. I gave her the abbreviated version of events while she listened. With growing outrage, she wrapped me in a fierce hug when I finished, whispering that James didn't deserve me. Marcus stopped by later with coffee and a gentle smile. He mentioned how strange it was that I'd introduced James as just someone I knew, but he didn't push for details. His kindness made my chest tight with gratitude for the people who saw me clearly, who valued me without conditions. Work became my refuge. Over the following days, I threw myself into my new responsibilities, staying late to avoid going home to an apartment that still smelled like James's cologne. My team responded well to my leadership, and my boss praised my dedication during our morning meetings. 3 days passed before James tried to contact me. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked and mentioned someone was waiting in the lobby. My stomach dropped when she described him. I told her to send him away, that I was in meetings all day. He came back the next day with flowers, roses ironically, not the white ones his mother preferred, but deep red ones that he used to bring me after fights. My assistant looked uncomfortable when she delivered them to my office. I thanked her and dropped them in the trash the moment she left. The texts started that evening. Dozens of them, ranging from apologetic to angry to desperate. He wrote about how unfair I'd been at the party, how I'd humiliated him in front of important people. Then he'd switch to saying he missed me, that we could work things out if I just talked to him. I deleted each message without responding, but they kept coming. He sent photos of us from happier times, trying to remind me of what we'd had. Each image felt like manipulation now, tainted by the knowledge of how easily he'd hidden me from the people who mattered most to him. A week after our confrontation, his mother called my office. My assistant transferred the call before I could stop her, and suddenly I was hearing that familiar voice asking to meet for tea. She wanted to discuss the misunderstanding between James and me. The audacity of it made my hands shake. I kept my voice professional as I declined, citing my busy schedule with a new promotion. She persisted, mentioning how James had been upset lately and how important it was to maintain harmony. The same woman who'd never acknowledged me as James's girlfriend now wanted to orchestrate our reconciliation. The manipulation escalated when Mina started, appearing at places I frequented. First at my gym, stretching on a mat near my usual spot, then at the coffee shop where I grabbed my morning latte. Each time, she'd offer a small smile and try to start conversations about James, about how worried his family was about him. I changed my routines, finding new places to work out and get coffee. But the message was clear. They were watching, waiting for me to break and come back to James. The invasion of my space felt deliberate, calculated to remind me that they knew my patterns, my life outside of their family dinners. Lisa noticed my stress and suggested drinks after work. We went to a quiet bar downtown where I finally told her everything. About the 47 dinners where I didn't exist, about the wedding planned without a bride, about Mina's convenient reappearance, and the job at the family restaurant. She listened with growing anger, occasionally interjecting with colorful descriptions of what she thought of James and his family. When I finished, she gripped my hand across the table and told me I was the strongest person she knew for walking away. The next morning, James was waiting by my car in the office parking garage. My heart raced as I approached, keys clutched between my fingers. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and wrinkled clothes. He stepped forward as I got closer, hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. I walked past, him to my car door, but he moved to block my path. His words tumbled out in a rush about mistakes and family pressure, and how he'd tell his parents the truth if I'd just come back. The desperation in his voice might have moved me once, but now, it just felt like another performance. I told him to move, keeping my voice steady despite my shaking hands. He reached for my arm and I stepped back quickly, warning him not to touch me. Something in my expression must have gotten through because he dropped his hand and stepped aside. I drove to work with my hands trembling on the wheel, checking my rearview mirror repeatedly to make sure he wasn't following. At the office, I informed security about the incident and asked them to prevent him from entering the building. The security guard, an older man named Vic, who'd always been kind to me, promised to keep an eye out. That afternoon, my boss called me into her office. She'd heard about the security request and wanted to make sure I was okay. I gave her a vague explanation about a difficult breakup, and she nodded understandingly. She mentioned the company had resources if I needed them, including counseling services. The pressure intensified over the following weeks. James's sister started texting, playing the sympathetic mediator. She wrote long messages about how James was struggling, how their parents were concerned, how everyone just wanted what was best for both of us. I recognized the manipulation tactics, the way she positioned herself as the reasonable one, while subtly suggesting I was being dramatic. Then came the lunch ambush. I was eating alone at a restaurant near my office when James's mother appeared at my table. She sat down without invitation, placing her designer purse carefully on the empty chair. Her smile was the same one she'd given Mina that night at dinner. She launched into a speech about family values and understanding cultural differences. She mentioned how difficult it must be for me, coming from a different background, to understand their ways. The condescension dripped from every word as she explained how James needed a wife who could support him properly. I set down my fork and met her eyes directly. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't lower my gaze or make myself smaller. I told her that I understood perfectly. I understood that she'd never seen me as good enough for her son. I understood that she'd been planning his marriage to someone else while I shared his bed. Her composure cracked slightly, but she recovered quickly. She mentioned how emotional American women could be, how we didn't understand the importance of family harmony. She suggested that perhaps it was better for everyone if James found someone more suitable. I agreed with her completely, which clearly wasn't the response she'd expected. I told her James should absolutely marry someone his family approved of, someone who fit their image of the perfect Korean daughter-in-law. I wished them luck with the wedding planning and stood to leave. She grabbed my wrist as I passed, her manicured nails digging in slightly. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she warned me not to cause trouble for their family. The threat was subtle but clear. I pulled my arm free and walked out without looking back. That evening, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside were photos of James and me from various moments over 3 years. Someone had taken the time to collect and print them. The message was obvious. They had been watching us all along, documenting our relationship even as they denied its existence. I called Lisa immediately, and she came over with Marcus and another friend from work. They helped me check my apartment for anything else unusual and suggested I stay with one of them for a few nights. The concern in their faces made me realize how serious the situation had become. Marcus offered his guest room, and I accepted gratefully. As I packed a bag, I found myself thinking about James's family's restaurant, their business, built on 16-hour days and sacrifice. They'd created their own kingdom where they made the rules, where they decided who belonged and who didn't. At ease. Marcus's apartment, I finally felt safe enough to process everything. He made tea while I curled up on his couch, exhausted from weeks of constant vigilance. He didn't push me to talk, just sat quietly nearby, working on his laptop while I stared at the wall. The next day at work, Vic pulled me aside to mention that someone had been asking about my schedule at the security desk. A young Korean woman who claimed to be my friend. He'd turned her away but wanted me to know. I thanked him and made a mental note to vary my arrival and departure times. My boss noticed my distraction during a team meeting and asked to speak with me privately afterward. I found myself telling her more than I'd intended about the situation. She listened with growing concern, especially when I mentioned the photos under my door and the woman asking about my schedule. She immediately offered to let me work from home for a while or to transfer to another office if that would help. The support overwhelmed me, and I had to blink back tears as I thanked her. She reminded me that the company valued me and would do whatever necessary to ensure I felt safe. I decided to work from home for a week, hoping things would calm down. Marcus insisted I stay with him longer, and his kindness made me wonder why I'd spent 3 years accepting crumbs of affection from someone who couldn't even call me his girlfriend in public. The texts from James evolved during my absence from the office. He wrote about Mina, how she didn't understand him the way I did, how his parents' approval felt hollow without me there, how the wedding plans felt like a noose around his neck. Each message seemed designed to pull me back into his orbit. I finally blocked his number, but he started emailing my work address. It helped that I could filter those to a separate folder to review with HR if needed. The violation of my professional space felt like another boundary crossed, another sign that he wouldn't accept my decision to leave. His sister escalated her efforts too, showing up at Lisa's apartment when she somehow discovered I'd been spending time there. Lisa told her to leave through the intercom, but she stayed, outside for an hour, occasionally pressing the buzzer and asking to talk. The persistence felt suffocating. Every safe space I'd created was being invaded by James's family, and their determination to either win me back or drive me away completely. I couldn't tell which outcome they actually wanted anymore. I returned to the office after a week, feeling stronger with the support of my colleagues. Vic gave me a reassuring nod when I walked in, and my team welcomed me back warmly. The normalcy of work helped ground me, reminding me that I had a life and identity beyond being James's hidden girlfriend. That afternoon, I was presenting to senior management when my assistant interrupted with an urgent message. James was in the hospital. His sister had called claiming he'd collapsed from stress, and they wanted me to come immediately. I finished my presentation with my mind racing. The timing felt manipulative, designed to derail my important meeting. But what if something was really wrong? I called the hospital directly and learned that James had been admitted for exhaustion and dehydration. Nothing life-threatening. The relief mixed with anger. Even his health was being weaponized to manipulate me. I sent his sister a brief text wishing him well but declining to visit. Her response was immediate and harsh, calling me heartless and selfish. That evening, I sat with Lisa and Marcus at our usual bar, telling them about the hospital drama. They exchanged concerned looks when I mentioned how the timing coincided with my big presentation. Marcus, usually so gentle, said something that stuck with me. He pointed out that James's family seemed to know exactly when to strike for maximum impact. We started documenting everything after that, every text, every unexpected appearance, every attempt at contact. Lisa suggested I might need legal protection if things escalated further. The thought of involving lawyers made my stomach turn, but I couldn't deny the situation was spiraling beyond normal breakup drama. The next twist came through my apartment building's management. They called to inform me that someone had tried to add themselves to my lease, claiming to be my fiancé who'd lost his key. The building manager had refused without my authorization, but wanted to make sure I knew about the attempt. My hands shook as I thanked them and asked them to flag my account for extra security. The boldness of trying to gain access to my apartment through official channels showed a new level of determination. I changed my locks that day and installed a security camera outside my door. James recovered quickly from his supposed health crisis, as I'd expected. He started showing up at professional events he knew I'd attend, always with Mina by his side. They'd positioned themselves where I couldn't avoid seeing them, her hand on his arm, both of them watching my reactions. The psychological warfare exhausted me. Every day brought new attempts to break down my boundaries or provoke a response. I found myself checking over my shoulder constantly, varying my routes to work, screening every call and message. My breaking point came when I discovered they'd contacted my parents. My mother called, confused, saying a lovely Korean woman had reached out about planning a surprise reconciliation party for James and me. The audacity of involving my family, who lived across the country and had nothing to do with this situation, ignited a fury I'd been suppressing. I called James directly for the first time since our breakup. He answered on the first ring, his voice hopeful and eager. That hope died quickly as I laid out in clear terms that he and his family were to cease all contact with me and my family immediately. He tried to claim ignorance about my parents, but I cut him off. I told him about the documentation I'd been keeping, about my company's support, about the security measures I'd taken. I made it clear that any further contact would be considered harassment. The silence on his end stretched long before he finally spoke. He sounded different, smaller somehow, as he admitted his mother had gotten carried away. He promised to make her stop, to call off Mina, to leave me alone if that's what I really wanted. I told him it was exactly what I wanted. 3 years of being hidden had been enough. I wouldn't spend another minute being manipulated by him or his family. The relationship was over, had been over the moment he introduced me as just someone from work. He started to protest, to explain again about cultural differences and family pressure. I hung up without listening. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said through actions. The calls and texts stopped after that conversation. No more surprise appearances at my gym or coffee shop. No more attempts to access my apartment or contact my family. The sudden silence felt almost as unsettling as the harassment had been. I spent the next week slowly reclaiming my life. I returned to my regular gym schedule, enjoyed my morning coffee without looking over my shoulder, focused on excelling in my new position. My team's project exceeded quarterly goals, and my boss mentioned potential opportunities for further advancement. Lisa and Marcus remained constant supports, checking in regularly, but also giving me space to heal. Other friends who distanced themselves during my relationship with James began reaching out again. I realized how isolated I'd become, how much of myself I'd sacrificed trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. One evening, while organizing my closet, I found the dress from James's mother tucked in the back. The ugly floral pattern made me laugh now instead of cry. I donated it along with everything else that reminded me of trying to be someone I wasn't. My apartment felt like mine again. I redecorated, adding colors and pieces that James had always said were too bold. I cooked foods his family would have wrinkled their noses at. I played music they would have called noise. Every choice felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Work continued to provide stability and growth. My promotion had come at exactly the right time, giving me something positive to focus on beyond the chaos of my personal life. My team's success reflected well on my leadership, and I found confidence I hadn't known I possessed. 3 months. After the breakup, I ran into James's sister at a professional conference. She looked uncomfortable when she spotted me, clearly debating whether to approach. I made the decision for her by nodding politely and continuing to my session. She found me during the lunch break, approaching cautiously. Her words surprised me. She apologized for her family's behavior, admitted they'd gone too far. She mentioned that James was dating someone new, a Korean woman his parents had chosen. The wedding was still planned for the original date. I wished her well, and I meant it. James had found his path, the one that aligned with his family's expectations. I'd found mine too, one where I existed fully in every space I occupied. The intersection of those paths had been painful, but the divergence was necessary. That night, I celebrated my team's successful presentation with colleagues who saw and valued me completely. Marcus raised a toast to new beginnings, and Lisa added one to knowing your worth. Surrounded by genuine support, I felt the last weights of that hidden relationship finally lift. The girl who'd accepted being introduced as friend 47 times was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that love shouldn't require you to disappear. That understanding had come at a cost, but it was a price worth paying for the freedom to be fully seen. I thought about James sometimes, wondered if he was happy in his carefully orchestrated life. But mostly, I focused on building my own happiness, one authentic choice at a time. The promotion I'd earned while invisible had become the foundation for a career where I was anything but. My phone stayed quiet now, free from manipulative texts and guilt-inducing calls. My apartment was secure, my routines uninterrupted, my life fully my own. The drama of those post-breakup months felt like a distant storm that had passed, leaving clearer skies in its wake. 6 months passed in relative peace, but I should have known James's family wouldn't give up that easily. The first sign came through an unexpected source. My landlord called to inform me that someone had been asking questions about my lease renewal. A Korean couple, claiming to be interested in the apartment, had been very persistent about viewing it, even offering above market rent if they could move in immediately. I recognized the tactic instantly. They were trying to force me out of my home through financial pressure. I signed a 2-year lease extension that afternoon, grateful my landlord valued stable tenants over quick profit. The next move came through my workplace. Our company started receiving anonymous complaints about my department's performance, specifically targeting projects I'd led. My boss showed me the emails during a private meeting. Her expression concerned but supportive. The complaints were vague but persistent, arriving weekly from different email addresses. We implemented stricter documentation procedures, and I made sure every decision had a paper trail. My team rallied around me, working harder to exceed every metric. The complaints continued, but lost their power against our consistent results. Then James's mother escalated to my professional network. She joined the same industry association I belonged to, showing up at networking events with Mina and James's aunt. They'd positioned themselves near me during cocktail hours, speaking just loudly enough for me to hear about James's upcoming wedding and how successful his new relationship was. I started bringing Lisa as my +1 to these events. She had a gift for steering conversations and creating buffers. When James's mother tried to approach me at one gathering, Lisa smoothly intercepted her, engaging in small talk about the appetizers until I could slip away. The wedding invitations started arriving at my office, not addressed to me, but to my colleagues, my boss, even our receptionist. Beautiful cards announcing James's marriage to a woman named Soo Jin, with his parents listed as hosts. The message was clear. They wanted everyone in my professional circle to know he'd moved on. My team found it strange, questioning why they'd received invitations to a stranger's wedding. I explained briefly about my past relationship, and they understood immediately. Several colleagues offered to decline the invitations in solidarity, but I told them to do whatever felt comfortable. Marcus discovered their next tactic when he overheard 2 women speaking Korean at his gym. They were discussing me by name, mentioning my routines, and wondering if I was dating anyone new. He recognized Mina from my descriptions and started documenting their conversations. The surveillance felt suffocating. They knew my gym schedule, my favorite restaurants, my weekend farmer's market routine. I varied my patterns, but the knowledge that they were tracking my movements made every public space feel unsafe. My breaking point came when they targeted my professional reputation directly. I was nominated for an industry award, recognition for the project I'd led after my promotion. 2 days later, an anonymous letter arrived at the awards committee claiming I'd stolen credit from team members and misrepresented our results. The committee investigated, interviewing my entire team. Every person defended me vigorously, providing documentation of my leadership and contributions. The nomination stood, but the stress of defending my integrity exhausted me. Lisa suggested we go on the offensive. She'd been documenting everything for months. The complaints, the surveillance, the invitation campaign. We compiled a comprehensive file showing a pattern of harassment designed to damage my professional standing. I met with HR and our legal department, laying out the situation completely. They took it seriously, especially when I showed them the anonymous complaints that had started after I'd blocked James's contact. The company issued a cease and desist letter to James and his family, warning them against further interference with my employment. The letter must have made an impact because the workplace harassment stopped immediately. No more complaints, no more letters to committees, no more wedding invitations to my colleagues. But I knew they wouldn't give up entirely. Sure enough, they shifted tactics again. This time, they went after my personal life. I started receiving flowers at my apartment with cards signed, "A Secret Admirer." The bouquets were elaborate, expensive, and arrived weekly. My neighbors began asking if I was dating someone new. I donated each arrangement to a nearby nursing home, but the deliveries continued. Then came the packages: jewelry, designer scarves, perfumes I'd never wear, all with romantic notes implying I had a devoted suitor. The gifts were calculated to make me look like I was leading someone on. Marcus helped me install additional security cameras to catch the delivery people. We discovered they were being paid in cash by a Korean woman matching James's mother's description. Armed with this evidence, I filed a police report for harassment. The officer who took my report seemed skeptical at first, but the documentation Lisa and I had compiled was thorough. Security footage, delivery receipts, the pattern of escalation following my cease and desist letter. He agreed to contact James's family with a warning. The gifts stopped, but I knew they were regrouping. James's sister reached out through LinkedIn with a professional-sounding message about a job opportunity. She claimed her company was looking for someone with my exact skill set, offering a significant salary increase. I recognized the trap immediately. They wanted to lure me into a position where they'd have power over my career. I declined politely, but she persisted with follow-up messages about what a perfect fit I'd be. I reported her LinkedIn account for harassment and blocked her. Their final attempt came through emotional manipulation. James himself appeared at a charity event I was attending for work. He looked different, thinner, older, wearing an expensive suit that screamed his parents' influence. Sujin was with him, a quiet woman who stayed close to his side. He maneuvered near me during the silent auction, pretending to bid on items while positioning himself in my line of sight. I focused on my conversation with a client, but I could feel his presence like a weight in the room. When I excused myself to use the restroom, he followed. I quickened my pace, but he called my name in the hallway. I kept walking, pushing through the bathroom door and locking it behind me. I waited 15 minutes before emerging, finding Lisa stationed outside like a guardian. She'd seen him follow me and intervened, telling him I wasn't interested in talking. He'd tried to give her a letter for me, but she'd refused to take it. Security had escorted him back to the main event, where Sujin waited with a resigned expression. That night, I realized something crucial. They would never stop entirely. James's family had built their identity around control and image. My refusal to play their game threatened their entire worldview. But I also realized I'd grown stronger than their tactics. I had documentation of everything. My company supported me. My friends formed a protective network. My career was thriving despite their interference. Every attack had made me more resilient, more certain of my worth outside their narrow definitions. The next morning, I met with a lawyer Lisa had recommended. We discussed options for a restraining order using the months of documentation I'd compiled. The lawyer was optimistic, especially given the escalating pattern and my employer's involvement. 2 weeks later, I sat in a small courtroom as a judge, reviewed our petition. James's family had hired their own lawyer, arguing cultural misunderstandings and overreactions. But the evidence was overwhelming. Harassment at work, surveillance, attempts to force me from my home, the gift campaign designed to damage my reputation. The judge granted a protective order against James, his parents, and Mina. They were prohibited from contacting me directly or indirectly, from coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace, from using third parties to harass me. James's mother's face crumpled when the judge read the order. His father sat stone-faced, gripping his wife's hand. James stared at the table, Sujin beside him looking deeply uncomfortable. Mina wasn't present, having apparently returned to Korea. As we left the courthouse, I felt something shift. The weight I'd carried for months began to lift. The legal protection was just paper, but it represented something larger. Official recognition. That their behavior was wrong, that I deserved peace. The harassment stopped completely after that. No more surprise appearances, no more anonymous complaints, no more attempts to infiltrate my life. Occasionally, I'd spot one of them at a distance at public events, but they'd carefully maintain the required space. I heard through professional channels that James's wedding had been postponed indefinitely. Sujin had apparently reconsidered after witnessing the courthouse proceedings. His parents' restaurant faced some challenges when word spread in the Korean community about the restraining order. But I didn't celebrate their struggles. I simply continued building my life. My team's success led to another promotion. I moved to a better apartment in a building with excellent security. I dated casually, taking time to understand what I wanted in a partner. Lisa and Marcus remained close friends, our bond strengthened by the support they'd shown. We established new traditions, Sunday brunches, monthly game nights, celebrating each other's achievements. They'd seen me at my most vulnerable and stood by me. One evening, while organizing paperwork, I found the photo James had left behind that night we broke up. We looked so young, so unaware of what was coming. I studied it for a moment, then dropped it in the shredder. The past had no more power over me. My life became fully my own. Morning coffee tasted better without checking for familiar faces. Evening runs felt free without scanning for surveillance. Work thrived without anonymous complaints undermining my efforts. Every day brought small victories of normalcy. I built new routines that belonged only to me. Weekend pottery classes, where I learned to shape clay with patient hands. Book club meetings where we discussed literature over wine. Volunteer work at the animal shelter, finding peace in simple acts of care. The girl who'd accepted invisibility was gone completely. In her place stood someone who understood her worth, who refused to shrink for anyone's comfort. The journey had been painful, but it led to a life lived fully in the light. My story became one of quiet triumph. Not the dramatic victory of movies, but the real success of someone who refused to let others define her worth. Every day I chose. To be visible was a victory. Every boundary I maintained was strength. Every moment of peace I'd earned was precious.